Hi, everybody. I'm Scott,
And I'm Luke.
And I'm Jonathan.
and this is the No Way to Hollywood podcast. Thanks for joining us.
Yes. Thank you.
You realize that if you're watching this right now, you're part of a this is a cult classic podcast is what this is. This is what we're trying to, this is what it is because there's only like 3 people watching. But if you keep watching repeatedly, you might be making this a cult classic podcast. And we want to thank you for doing that.
Thank you for doing your part in making us a cult classic.
But
You
not a cult.
cultists.
We don't want to be a cult.
Uh,
Nor are we trying to say all of our fans are cultists. Though some of you may be. And
Yeah,
if you are, you should probably get out.
That's a
And
good
if-
point.
But like just saying, maybe we're a cult classic podcast.
So, in case you couldn't figure it out based on that introduction,
We're so subtle.
Are,
We're so subtle.
we are doing a new genre discussion on cult classics. So, I know we've even today been discussing a lot of different possible definitions. What are some of the key features of what makes a cult classic? And why does the dude's list on IMDb of the 100 best cult classics include films that shouldn't be there?
Well, I would like to start this off with many of our genre discussions, which again, cult classic, I don't really think is a genre, but since it's a term, I'm just going to read this, Wikipedia one, which of course, as we all know, Wikipedia is the preeminent source of
Yeah.
information.
Yeah, this is how you really know what's going on.
Yeah, Wikipedia says a cult film or cult movie, also commonly referred to as the cult classic, is a film that acquired a cult following. Well, thank you, Wikipedia. Cult films are known for their dedicated, passionate fan base, which forms an elaborate subculture, members of which engage in repeated viewings, dialogue quoting, and audience participation. That is the brief 2 sentence, definition from Wikipedia. The first one I found on Google. Uh, Gentlemen, do you have things to add or subtract? What do you understand a cult classic to be?
Well, Wikipedia, just to remind you, you should not use the word that you're defining in the definition of the word you're defining. But
Luke, a cult classic film is a cult classic film, and you
Oh.
know that good and well.
Oh,
Okay?
I see. I see now. See
I just
now.
want to clear that up for you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. Okay, so now having a following, see, and this is where I think that as we were talking earlier, like it has to be like a movie that wasn't well received initially and then develops a cultish follow, like this group of people that like find this movie and are like, I like this movie for whatever reasons, right? Because like a movie like, I don't know, any of the Marvel films where people start quoting the lines and like there's a dedicated fan base to that group and like but that's not a cult classic. That's just like a movie that did well in the box office, right? So like this has to be a film that develops a very specific audience, I think. And okay, so they quote it. Okay, that's fine. But like elaborate subculture, like what does that mean? Like an elaborate, like what makes it elaborate?
Well, I do think it's interesting bringing up this idea of elaborate subculture that dresses up as characters maybe and quotes lines. That sounds a lot like Comic-Con, and
Sure.
Comic-Con was relatively niche
Good
until
point.
of last 10, 20 years. And potentially cult classics are becoming more mainstream. So but I think you bring up a great idea or a great comparison, which is what's the difference between a cult classic movie and a popular movie?
Right.
Because in a sense they're both. And one thing I would say it came to mind when you were talking is a cult classic movie is a movie you've never heard of that if you went to a screening of, suddenly you think it was the most popular movie in the world because everyone there was quoting it and laughing and having a great time.
There you go.
And they all are dressing up as characters. You're like, I didn't even know this movie existed until like 5 minutes ago.
Right.
Right.
Like that's closer to what I think it is.
So there are some great examples that I have kind of on both sides of this, of a movie that the ideal cult classic, obviously, as well as the movie that some people might call a cult classic but may or may not be. So let's start out with the obvious example, which over the last couple of years, the movie The Room has it kind of come to my attention as one of these I mean, just classic cult classic movies is like almost definitionally what a cult classic is. What do you guys? How would you guys respond to that?
Well, I mean, I've only watched The Disaster Artist. I haven't watched the movie itself. But yeah, you have a group of people that go to this movie and see it a lot. Like there's a video out there, like an essay about this whole thing, this subculture, and this guy's like, yeah, I've watched it like 200 times. You're like I've watched some movies that I like a lot, and I'm not even close to 200. Like I'm not even close to 20. You know, on like the movies that I enjoy. So like, what is happening? And then the fact that they like you bring spoons with you so you can throw them, and like there's some weird stuff apparently in this culture. So yes, makes perfect sense to me that that is truly a cult classic. Like here's a movie that you haven't heard of until you find out that like there's this group of people that like this movie, and it's this crazy film, right? Like,
Well, and here's another thing, guys. Like, as I think about it, the cult class, like another one that comes to mind is Rocky Horror Picture Show, which I've never ever
right,
seen
me neither.
and don't really care to. And so right now, with our current kind of where we're going with cult classics, it's like movies I'm never going to watch. Um, and I'm not entirely sure that that's the fullness of the definition. Like, I'm trying to look up here real quick.
Well, you Jonathan are what determines whether a movie's a cult classic or not. Is it a movie you want to watch that other people do? You
I'm
know,
glad that you understand that, Luke. It's about time people start to give me some respect for my influence in the filmmaking world. Yeah, okay. So I just looked up Big Trouble in Little China, which is a film made by, oh, I should know his name right off the top of my head. What is it? John Carpenter. Okay, you guys seen any John Carpenter movies?
you've shown me some John Carpenter movies.
Did I show you one or did I show you multiple John
We've seen
Carpenter
a
movies?
few, a couple
Okay.
few, a couple
couple
many.
few?
I have no idea.
A couple many. John Carpenter films, a lot of them are very beloved by those who like them, and I would say are basically cult classic status. But you know, if you bring up the movie if you bring up the movie Big Trouble in Little China, if you bring up the movie, it's another one of his older school ones. Like people know movies like Assault on Precinct 13. People know movies like The Thing, which are
Oh, the
think big-
thing.
they're bigger than just a cult classic because they've really gained, I think, a lot of appreciation over the years. But movies like Big Trouble in Little China are still relatively like I didn't know about it, but my brother showed it to me and I found it humorous. I showed it to Scott and a friend of ours, and they both thought it was the stupidest movie. I didn't understand why they didn't think it was hilarious. And but that's the thing, is like it's this movie that I can bring up Big Trouble in Little China to most anybody, and they have no clue what I'm talking about. They have no clue, even though those same people might know The Thing, might know Assault on Precinct 13. They might know some movies from John Carpenter, but they don't know this weird movie that's this like Kurt Russell's in Chinatown and like it's Mortal Kombat stuff going on. And he's like, whoa, it's just a comedy, right? Anyway, that's a cult classic. And in fact, when I looked it up, it is in its first definition is cult classics. And I just want to read a couple other ones because this looks like a better list than what we've
Yeah, this first
seen
Google
over.
result is terrible.
This
Right.
Google result I'm getting has Big Trouble in Little China, The Rocky Horror Picture Show, The Room,
Mm-hmm.
Dread, Donnie
Okay.
Darko, Ginger Snaps, The Sacrament, and The Disaster Artist, which probably is there likely because of the fact that it has to do with The Room.
Yeah, yeah.
But
Stars was actually a good movie, though, I thought.
I mean, it's awkward as all get out.
I enjoyed it.
I
yeah.
know you guys did.
And I don't typically like awkward humor, so yeah, I enjoyed it.
That's great. I found it weird. I think I could talk about Dread and Donnie Darko for a little bit. Dread, have you guys seen Dread?
I've seen Dread once a long time ago. I want to watch it again, but then you tried watching it again and you were like, I don't know, man.
It's just really violent. It's just like it's a little intense for me. Scott, have you seen Dread with Carl Urban?
Pretty sure I haven't.
Okay.
I may have seen scenes from it, but I'm pretty sure I haven't seen the movie.
Perhaps our audience of 3 people might be more familiar with the movie Judge Dredd that had Sylvester Stallone in it. And I don't think it's a cult classic as much as a movie that flopped hard at the box office. But then there's this other movie, you see, that's called Dredd that stars as Carl Urban as the titular character, Judge Dredd. And it was made...
and it also has like the bad girl the bad.
Lena Headey.
Yeah, she, like Game of Thrones and stuff. So like,
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So was made in the last, what, 5, maybe 10 years. That's actually been a little bit of time.
It's got to be more than 5 years.
Let me double check.
We're
check.
Googling searching the movies so we can find
2012.
the answer. 2012. There you go.
Almost 10 years ago.
So not quite 10 years. Wow. Okay.
The day the Mayan calendar ended.
Mm-hmm.
So this film was not super popular at the box office. It had a fair amount of positive critical reception, but it wasn't like people thought it was the next greatest artsy movie that's going to win an Academy Award, like all the other. And by the way, there should be a term for that, which is like pretentious nonsense award, like movies that never got box office appeal and no one ever liked, but the Academy did for 1 year.
Right.
That's, what those movies are. Anyway, Dredd.
Or what?
So Dredd is an action movie, and I went and saw it in the theater, and it was pretty intense because it's pretty violent, guys. It's pretty dark and pretty violent. But it's somewhat endearing too, in the sense of like Carl Urban's portrayal of that character is just great, and it's just it's cheesy, but it's also serious, and it's that lone cop kind of thing, right? Like, you don't even know what you're dealing with, that kind of thing, right? Like,
I am the law.
I am the law. That is the great Dredd phrase. Anyway,
and then you can meet the law in video game high school, and that's kind of fun too.
Sure. Yeah. Anyway, just saying, I saw it in the theater. It was pretty good, and people I knew who had seen it thought it was pretty good, but it never made it didn't make a huge box office splash, and people have wanted a sequel, and by people I mean the cult following, the big fans of this film want a sequel, and so I see on film websites every so often, an article about, hey, those fans want a film and it's not happening.
And it never will.
Or Carl Urban, talked about how he'd like to make a movie, but it probably won't happen. That's kind of the story of this movie. And then I don't know if anybody else has anything else to say about that, but it's out there. People like it, but no, like, it's not necessarily going to get a sequel. It's not necessarily going to do well enough in the box office. It didn't go any farther, and most people are generally apathetic, don't remember, don't care, but there is a small group of people who really love it.
Yeah, it's making me think of RoboCop, not the remake that was awful, but like the
awful.
original that people like. There were guys in my internship way back in college who were like, I'd buy that for $1. So like, that's the only quote from the movie. I've seen it, but like, that's the only quote from the movie that I know because they quoted it all the time, right? But like, they enjoyed that film. It's a film that they really enjoyed. See, and then there's other movies, like, I feel like Hardcore Henry should be a cult classic because it's just, it's kind of nuts in what it does and how it works. But like, I don't think there were enough people who like really liked it. I think there were like, people were like, well, that was interesting. I went for a ride there. I don't even know. I'm very angry about the ending. But like...
Definition.
Ooh.
How about this as at least a fun definition of cult classic? It's a B movie that lots of people think should be an A movie.
Yeah, but I don't think that they think it should be an A movie.
Think should be an A movie.
See,
what was that?
Incorrectly think.
Incorrectly think.
I don't think though that people think that it should be an A movie. I don't think there's anybody out there who's like The Room is actually up there with like what Sony Pictures puts out.
The
right?
guy who watched it 200 times is clearly enjoying it more than any A movie out there.
Absolutely, and
well,
that's
okay. So part of the enjoyment for the guy that's seen it 200 times isn't the movie itself, but the experience of going to see the movie. Right,
but you don't have that with Dredd. You don't have that with Big Trouble in Little China. You don't have it with Donnie Darko. I mean, The Room and the Rocky Horror Picture Show, yes, they have those sorts of true followings of like, hey, come to the theater again and we'll do weird stuff and we'll have a good time. None of these other movies that I would still say are cult classics have that kind of following that I'm aware of. Certainly not to that same level where, yeah, AMC will show that movie and then you'll get a full theater of people throwing, I don't know, samurai hats at the screen or something. I have no idea. Like, I don't know what they would do for.
Oh man, Bodyguard! Everybody getting out their scarves and
that would be our version if we actually liked the Bodyguard, which we didn't. We just like to make that joke.
We just like the joke. The joke is great.
Yeah. Also, that best line in that entire movie. I don't want to talk about this ever again. that's bad. Anyway, Dredd doesn't have that, right? people want a sequel.
But
There's a following, but they're not going to the theater to do this kind of stuff. They're not throwing blood and guts at the screen or anything, you know?
well, okay. But are there special showings of Dread that these people go to together?
Due to Alamo Drafthouse existing, there are special showings of lots of movies, and not necessarily movies that didn't do well at the box office. You know, like that's the thing. Nowadays, like I went and saw Gladiator again at AMC at one point. Is that because Gladiator is a cult classic? No, it won a Best Picture or something, didn't it? Like it's so I have a hard time with the special screening as being the delineator or a part of the definition specifically, just because even though it does happen, I don't know if it's only cult classics that get that.
Well, I wouldn't say it's only cult classics that get it, but it is almost a key feature of cult classics, in my opinion, because you do have to get that community of people together that actually like this movie, no matter how bad it actually is. Like, how else does the community form around the movie like that?
Well, and this is where, is a cult classic automatically a bad movie? Or like,
Well, okay, so that's the next thing I was going to bring up with some examples, right? So there are a couple of movies that I am aware of that I think are actually really good movies, and you guys can disagree with me, but Moulin Rouge, for instance, has almost a
Sure.
cult following to it because they do special sing-along screenings that people will come to, much like the example you gave earlier in
Rocky Horror Picture Show.
yes, that one.
Yeah.
Right, but like here's where I'm having trouble, because that movie I felt was actually like an A film, right? You know, like it was made by popular director, produced by big names, released by a big studio. Like it was a real movie kind of thing, right?
Well, it had
Because
Nicole Kidman and Ewan McGregor.
right, like stars, star power, all that stuff, and that's where like Princess Bride is like a great, lovely, awesome movie that wasn't like, nobody thought it was going to be amazing, the way that it was.
My other example.
But like, is it a cult classic? Like, I love quoting it because I think it's a great film, right? Like, and it definitely did better post, or actually no, because it did better than anybody expected. But I think it did well in the box office from the get go. So
No, according to Google and Wikipedia, The Princess Bride was not a major box office success, but it became a cult classic after its release to the home video market.
okay, well, I mean, because that's like one of the greatest movies ever. Like I don't know, like
Oh.
Sorry.
yeah, we got it.
So it's hard because to me, having not been around when The Princess Bride was released in
Right.
theaters,
Right.
The Princess Bride is a great movie, and everyone I know loves The Princess Bride. Like they've either just not realized they love it yet because they haven't seen it yet, or they love it. Like that's pretty
Right.
much what it is
Yeah.
with The Princess Bride.
And so, like, can it be a cult following when it's the entire world? Like, is that
Yeah.
cultish enough, or like, because I feel like it's just like this is a gem of a film, right? Like, there's gems that are just like great movies that maybe weren't discovered right away or whatever. But like,
Yeah.
that's a gem of a movie where like, I don't think it's a cult classic because like, there's no small cult. Like, it's the entire world drink the Kool-Aid here, you know?
Well, it
like,
depends on your definition again. Like,
Sure.
is your definition that it has to be somewhat bad? Is your definition that it's because it seems like the only definition that I've heard everybody, whether it's the internet or people I've ever talked to in my life, the only thing that seems to be the commonality is it didn't do well at the box office, and then somehow a lot of people like it.
right.
If that's even a small group of people who really like it, or a large group of people who really like it, it's just the fact that they liked it after it hit the box office. Seems to be the only common thing I'm seeing from all of our talk. Like that's the one thing I think we could all agree on right now is generally speaking, a cult classic has to have done poorly at the box office to be a cult classic.
Right. Okay. And then for me, I would say the other definitional piece for me in a cult classic is that it can't actually appeal to a wide audience. Like there is a group of people, however small, who enjoy it, but like it's not like a blockbuster. It's not one that like everybody is like, this is a great movie, right? So Princess Bride for me doesn't make sense as a cult classic because again, it's a beloved great movie, right? Whereas something like The Room, the vast majority of people are like, what is this movie? And then there's the few people who get it or whatever who are like, this movie's amazing, right? So I don't know.
Well, I don't know. The community around The Room, I don't think would call it a great movie, right? They just
video link below. Okay.
There is an understanding that it's a bad movie, but let's go enjoy watching this movie together. And that's so my definitional piece really does relate more to the community that forms around this movie. So,
okay.
But, like, at the same time, like, there are big blockbusters, like we've mentioned Marvel movies, that get some of that same kind of treatment, right? There is
so like, is Star Wars, like the original trilogy, like, is that a cult classic? But no, because it made a ton of money.
Blockbuster.
Right. It made a ton of money right off the bat. Yeah.
And to a certain extent, like the community piece, it meets, but I think there's other pieces to it that
it made a bunch of money, and it's actually a good film.
Right.
I don't know. The community side of it, I don't think to me a cult classic has to be about whether or not there's like a Comic-Con, a small little mini Comic-Con of that movie, or a small little group of people who do weird things with the movie, as much as it's about the fact that there is a, quote unquote, passionate fan base, or rather there are big fans of this film because they think it's great or because they think it's bad and fun to watch anyway.
Right.
It doesn't matter why necessarily they like it, but there's a group of people who really love it, and they didn't, even if they showed up during the box office time, it wasn't enough to make it a box office hit, and they love it now. And really, again, cult classics to me seem to be something about discovery too, like
right,
that sort of that home box office idea where it came out in the theater, it didn't really do well, and then for some reason everyone rented it from Blockbuster in the 90s, and then it was like this huge thing that everyone knows and loves, when it really should have gotten that love when it was in the theater, but it never did, right? So
well, and that's like Jennifer's Body comes to mind for that, right? Where like, because of marketing and other factors, like this movie flopped so hard in the theater, and then in the decade afterward, people are like, wait, this movie is genius, like, I don't know. I still haven't seen it. I don't know. I may be part of that group that like didn't make sense. What?
You want to see it?
No, I don't. I don't know. I've watched enough video essays that I'm very intrigued by the story of the film. I don't know if I'm interested in the film itself.
Okay. So, do we have a working definition of cult classic, or is at least one of us going to derail it for everybody else?
I always derail it for us. So there you go.
I'm okay with this. It's just like, I guess the challenge is what makes it a small movie that no one got around to seeing, but the few people who saw it were like, that's a good movie, and a cult classic, right? Because like Frequencies, for me, I'm like, this is a great movie that no one saw. Or, Gamer's Darkness Rising. This is a great movie that no one saw, except everybody I show it to is like, this movie's amazing, right? So that's where, like, it's a cult classic in the sense that like there's a small group of people who are like, this movie's amazing, and everybody who sees it is like becomes part of that group. But like, because it's actually a good movie.
Well, that's the thing is, again, I'm still thinking that like The Princess Bride could potentially be a cult classic. It just doesn't feel like it anymore, right, because enough people have seen it now.
Right.
Where it's like it's this great movie that everyone now loves, but it's because the cult classic following kept on spreading because it has a wide appeal more than it did when it came out in the box office for whatever reason.
Right. And that's where, I don't know, like that wide appeal thing is the thing that just kind of keeps tripping me up, where I'm like, there is a group of people that really enjoy this movie, but like from a popular standpoint, people are like, I don't get it.
Is it that cult classics can eventually graduate to classics? right? Because was The Princess Bride a cult classic for a time where most people hadn't seen it? There was a group of people who really loved it, and it was a cult classic. But over time, it actually was so good that eventually it was no longer a cult classic. It's just a classic now. Now everyone knows.
Right, and that's where for me the cult classic part has to be like, this movie can never become a classic because it's a cult classic. It's one that there is a group of people who, for whatever psychological reasons, like this film. And the rest of us are like, what in the world, right? Or we're part of that group that's like, I love this film for, and I can explain it to everybody, and the people I show it to are like, what? Except for like the 3 other people who are like, this movie, like, it speaks to me, right? Like,
yeah.
Like, okay, so like on this list, right? Like Donnie Darko, that for me makes perfect sense as a cult classic because that movie doesn't make any stinking sense. I've watched like video essays and like read, okay, whatever, but like,
But there's a creepy bunny, so it's really cool.
I mean, 12 Monkeys, totally believe that that's a cult classic, right? Like that makes sense to me. Big Lebowski, yeah, there are people who like that movie. I don't like what, okay? But like Monty Python on the Holy Grail, like people loved that movie from the beginning, and in general, people like that movie. So it doesn't make sense to me as saying, oh, that's a cult classic, right?
Okay, when we say in general, though, we got to remember that we're geeks and nerds ourselves. Like, we hang out with a certain kind of people. Like, we don't necessarily hang out with, like, a bunch of jocks who are like, yeah, Monty Python's awesome. Like, not that there aren't jocks who love Monty Python. I'm sure there's a lot of them.
They just haven't seen it yet.
Well, there is that. But I'm just saying that there's also a level of echo chamberedness potentially. Like, is Princess Bride... Okay, everyone I know loves Princess Bride, and I have a tendency to believe that's a great movie so that everyone's going to love it. But is it really the thing that everyone's going to love?
Well, right. See, but like compare that to like something like Labyrinth, right? Where like there are people who enjoy the movie, and like I like Jennifer Connelly and David Bowie. Like, that's nuts. But like,
look, I would consider some of the major religions of the world to be cults.
Sure.
And they have a lot of followers, and they're big and well known, right? And then there's the cult that's like, Jim started this out of his van. And they're like, we believe that the stick does this, and it's like, worship the stick, right? Like,
claw. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, like there's a small cult of like 3 people who like Labyrinth. I'm sorry, I know there's like way more who love Labyrinth. I just don't. I'm not one of them. I'm not worshiping the stick. Okay, get out of here. But there are people who like, there's like 3 people who love this movie, and they love it so much that we actually know that they love it. Like, we don't know what the movie is, we don't like the movie, but we know there's 3 people who love that movie. That's what we know. And then there's, maybe there's other movies that are like, yeah, they're wider appeal, even though it's a cult class or started off that way. Like, I think there's something about more of the trajectory of the film's release and popularity cycle that seems to be a part of what makes it a cult classic, rather than a purgatory it has to stay in to be a cult classic. But I also understand what you're saying. And like, yes, generally speaking, to an easy way to spot a cult classic is to be like, have you heard this movie before? Do you have anything about, like, are there people who really are into it and they go to secret showings at midnight at AMC? Like, these are things that help you understand that that's a cult thing. That's a cult classic.
Yeah, like The Lost Boys. So I'm looking at this list here. Like, The Lost Boys makes more sense as a cult classic than, say, The Princess Bride, right? But then like The Breakfast Club, like they're saying this is a cult classic, but like comparing that to Easy Rider, which like Easy Rider is a movie that like film professors make you watch.
Yeah, it's like a cult of film professors. Again, the Academy Awards are cult classics. And I mean, they're the Academy cult classic every year. Oh, we really like this one. Great. Have your midnight screening and stop showing it to everybody else. No one likes your movie, okay?
Yeah. So this it's just interesting. Like, I'm having a hard time. El Topo is on this list.
Oh, boy. Oh, boy. El Topo up in here.
I mean, Napoleon Dynamite. Okay,
sure. But that's the other thing. There's so many people who quote that movie and like that movie now. Like, it's not small.
Right.
It kind of caught like wildfire.
It never was small. Like,
exactly. And like, it was a low budget film, so it made its money like no problem. But then like you have Boondock Saints, which,
Well, for a time, I think it was. For a time, I think Boondock Saints was sort of just this like kind of quirky but interesting action movie, right? That no one really saw much of, and then it just caught fire over time. Like, it's this idea of, I think, this movie that didn't have its day in the sun, and over time it finds its audience, right?
Okay.
And like it just finds its audience, and maybe that audience is just really big. Like I think that's possible. It's just about the fact that the trajectory of the film finding its audience was a lot longer, or came out of home video or special screenings or something like, or word of mouth, more than, you know, it came out in theaters and everyone went and saw it and it made $1 billion.
Okay,
right?
So the working definition right now of cult classic is a movie that the theaters and the marketing was unable to get to the audience, but over time the movie was found by its audience, who now passionately, you know, promote it because they found this movie and they're like, this is my movie.
Right.
Yep.
Okay.
That's the best definition I think we've had.
All right, high fives, everybody. High fives. Woo! Woo! Are there any good cult classics?
Well,
I mean that depends, because if you consider The Princess Bride a cult classic, the answer to that is clearly yes.
Right. I mean, here's Office Space on the list.
Ooh, Office Space.
You know, like
that's a cult classic. It's the cult of you have to have worked in an office before you can watch that movie.
Yeah. Because yes, the first time I watched the movie, it didn't make sense. After working in an office,
or
more sense.
It's all true.
I also found that it doesn't work for the people who are bosses.
Let's see.
Yeah, if you grew up being in charge, you don't know what. Well, I feel like there's got to be something going on.
Yeah.
You identify with, but yeah, that is funny.
So like the number 1 on this list is A Clockwork Orange, and number 2 is Pulp Fiction, and number 3 is Fight Club, and number 4 is Kill Bill, and number 5 is Reservoir Dogs, and I'm like, I don't know, guys. Those all seem
again, I think that with the Tarantino ones in particular, I think they got some critical acclaim, and there was a group who understood that was good. But I don't think Pulp Fiction made a lot of money in the box office. I don't think I know Reservoir Dogs, I think, didn't make like a ton of money at the box office at all. And Kill Bill, I would think that'd be more in the heyday of Tarantino. Yeah. So you'd think that would make more money, but maybe it didn't quite get there either. I mean, Tarantino is a particular flavor of film. You know what I'm saying? True. Like, and Pulp Fiction was in many ways Tarantino being like, "Hi,
yeah,
I'm Tarantino."
Right.
Reservoir Dogs is his actual first movie, but in a lot of ways, people got introduced to him through Pulp Fiction. Agreed. And again, that was how, like, the 90s. So that's 20, 30 years ago that movie came out. So we're talking about movies that by now, and with filmmakers making other movies that are really big, that came out of that now it's like this established thing, like, oh yeah, Pulp Fiction, of course, everybody knows Pulp Fiction, but was it anybody had any clue about it for 5 years after it came out? Was it slowly growing and finding its audience so that, again, now Pulp Fiction is the well-known thing and it wasn't? I mean, that's the thing I think is so interesting about it, is it seems to me that cult classics really can potentially graduate in a way and become like established film knowledge. And certainly from film school, you go to film school, you're going to hear about Pulp Fiction. You're going to hear about The Big Lebowski. You're going to hear about all sorts of movies, like the common knowledge to me. So when someone's like, I don't know what The Big Lebowski is, I'm like, oh, right. I have this cult knowledge thing going on because all these other people have been around.
Right.
But I don't know, you know, like, I think that's part of the deal here. And Fight Club, I know for sure, definitely did not do well in the box office, but everyone started to love it on home video.
Interesting.
And by everyone, I assume males.
Like, was originally like X-rated or whatever, and so like, who's going to go see that? A Clockwork Orange.
Oh yeah, and I mean, and really honestly, Kubrick movies are not my cup of tea for certain. So I can understand why a lot of people didn't necessarily want to go see the next Kubrick movie.
Yeah.
Right.
And yeah, Clockwork Orange is not a pleasant film. I haven't even seen it, and all I know is like, yeah, demented people go and rape and torture and murder people, get put into brainwashing school, and continue to rape and murder and brainwash. It's just like, it's just bad news.
It's a weird one. I found it more accessible than 2001: Space Odyssey.
Well, there's probably more things that happen in Clockwork Orange.
Yeah, I think that's probably true.
2001: Space Odyssey is like, hey, have you thought about space lately? What if an AI was trying to kill you? Ooh, interesting. Space, though. You thought about space lately?
And time. Can you see yourself as a baby?
Can you see the creation of all things through evolution and crazy color? Anyway.
Yeah.
Well, gentlemen, we've certainly found a lot of cult classics. I'm glad we came to a definition. But if you were to recommend one quote unquote cult classic to our 3 viewers, what would your recommendation be?
It would be my own film so that it can become a cult classic. No,
Oh,
I'm just kidding. See, like what I really want to do here is I want to predict, like I want to think of a movie that came out in the last year or two that didn't get enough attention that should be a cult classic or is on its way to becoming a cult classic. That's what I want to do. But there's been a lot of bad movies lately. So I don't know if that movie exists right now.
Okay, well, okay, so I'm gonna go with any of the films that I've mentioned that I said were good. You could watch those, but also Simone or Sim One. If that one I didn't mention during this episode, so Sim One or Simone, it came out. I saw the trailers, was like, this is going to be interesting. It came out and nobody said anything. So then I eventually got to see it and I was like, this movie's great. I really enjoyed this film. So Simone or Sim One, Al Pacino.
yeah, I remember when that one came out. I didn't see it.
Hey.
Well, there you go. Check it out. Become part of the cult classic following of this film.
This is tough. I feel like I'm sure I've got a better, more like no one's seen this movie, but I love it movie that I could recommend. But I'll just go with what I already mentioned in the episode, which is Big Trouble in Little China. It's a quirky, weird comedy movie, and you might find it endearing and fun, or you might think it's the stupidest thing you've ever seen, or you might have both reactions at the same time. It's okay. It's Kurt Russell, and he's a trucker, and he goes to Chinatown, and he gets involved in like a secret underground gangster Chinese ancient emperor evil sorcerer problems, and it's hilarious. And if it doesn't make sense to you, I will just give you this piece of information, which is you got to consider this movie as Kurt Russell, though he is the protagonist of our film, is actually the sidekick of the movie. He just doesn't realize he's the sidekick. There's another character in there who is very much like would be the protagonist, like a hero's journey protagonist in the movie. Right next to him is Best Bud, who's getting him into this world. And Jack Burton, Kurt Russell, believes he is the main character. He's really just the sidekick of the movie. So anyway, I think it can be pretty funny, and it's very different. And if you like Mortal Kombat, the video game, know this. Ed Boon saw Big Trouble in Little China and was like, oh, that'd be kind of cool. Just saying. There's some cool stuff in there.
Yes. Well, you guys are going to leave me the easy answer, and whether or not you consider it a cult classic or not, because everybody loves it. Yes, Luke?
No, I'm waiting. Just waiting. I was building tension.
Go see The Princess Bride. It's totally worth it.
Oh, wait, you already have.
Yeah.
Millions of times.
Yeah.
And I own it, and we'll watch it again maybe right after this podcast because it's that good.
Wow.
Yeah, because there's probably nothing else on TV right now.
Well, that's probably true.
Yep. Well, everybody, thank you for joining us. We'll catch you again next time.
I don't know if I'll catch you, but I will be here, and maybe you can catch us.
Oh, okay. All philosophical on me there, Luke.
Yeah.
You cut this already?
No, I'm about to.
Okay.
Bye.
Spare the viewers. Get out. Get out now. Go.